being in a long-term relationship, developing trust, it's just the abuse of that trust that makes it malicious. Grooming is malicious because there's a pre-established intent to do harm. If your intention is benign or at least transparent, you have the foundation for an ethical, for the foundation of an ethical relationship. It's these factors that make long-term social engineering hard to identify and talk about. Understanding these methods can help us build better relationships when used responsibly. The example that I give is active listening to your boss is a best practice, even if you don't intend on building a long-term relationship. I do have ulterior motives for speaking today. Like, I wanted to talk to you about social engineering. It's not the only reason that I wanted to speak to you tonight. A medical professional asked me how she could communicate privately with her patients that need help. This question inspired me to write a short booklet about the foundational operations security best practices. I call it the Camp Coordinator's Guide to Operational Security. It's designed to help people understand how to use technology to communicate securely and plan privately. It covers end-to-end encryption, VPN with Tor, how to organize the principle with the principle of least privilege, and how to share files over overly paranoid encryption, and how entities collect information about you. Overly paranoid encryption is a procedural methodology designed to provide the highest standard of privacy and data integrity. I wrote this methodology specifically for this guide. I consider it my first meaningful contribution to the information security world. Essentially, just sending one file over two end-to-end encrypted tunnels, right? You're sending an encrypted 7-zip file over Proton Mail, let's say, and then the password and the file hash over Signal. This has been kind of a standard in, sensitive information operations. We finally have the tools to allow everyday people to do it. And so with that, I say I need your help. I just started on Twitter last month because I got accepted to this speaking opportunity, which was incredible, by the way. This still even in this moment, feels like a dream. I want to help spread this guide to the right people, not necessarily to a lot of people, just mostly the right people, the people that are organizing with medical professionals to try and privately and securely connect those resources. So please connect with me on social media. I will be posting this guide to GitHub after this talk. And I can now open the floor to questions. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that I added some value to your experience. I'm aware that that's a short runtime. Where's my assistants? Any questions? Over here? You go there?
Hi, Mike. I have a question for you.
Hi.
Have you ever socially engineered your family?
I try my best, because in my mind, social engineering tenets are the same tenets as what builds authentically meaningful relationships.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Hi. Loved your talk.
Thank
Thank you. I already follow you on Twitter. So question for you. How would you say what you talked about ties in with current disinformation and misinformation stuff that's out there? Again, with keeping in mind with the political sort of sphere and the COVID related sphere, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Can you, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So everything that you just talked about, could you also connect that with disinformation in either the political space or the COVID space, or both? Because there's been a lot of that.
Okay, as I understand it, the question is, how do we address misinformation and disinformation using these tools? And the way that I think about it, we're trying to train people how to recognize manipulative psychology so that they understand that they need to question the information that they're being fed. It's really hard to go to a family member and say, you are being brainwashed by this political affiliation. You're being emotionally triggered by this and that. We can't be the police of truth because truth in our world is still a very objective thing. I think social engineering kind of demonstrates that people can suspend their sense of reality, and that the conversation is more about how to recognize the tactics than the specific messaging.
How do you convince someone that there is still value in a relationship? AKA, how do you convince someone that it's not time to break up yet? It's applicable.
How do you convince someone it's not time to break up yet? That's a really interesting question, but I would probably point to questioning the value in that relationship first. If you're at the point where you have to try and use advanced psychological tactics to hold someone in a relationship, it might be time to evaluate whether that's a really meaningful and healthy relationship.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
First of all, really like the presentation, but is there a specific VPN provider that you would suggest, or do you prefer building your own?
I do recommend NordVPN specifically because it has a very easy way for people to incorporate Tor into the VPN before you Tor mentality. So I included that in the guide, recommendations for specific vendors and why I think that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Micah. In doing work to help prevent people from getting vished, etc., it seems that one of the hardest things to get around is just the apathy around people not really worrying if they're being manipulated. Do you have a tactic to help kind of break through that apathy and make them care?
That's a really funny point. So the question is, how do you break through apathy when it comes to security awareness training? And this is funny because it's going to be one of those things where we use these tools for good, even though we're still using what could be considered manipulative behavior, right? You want to create a strong emotional response to the information. You want to try and help people understand that there are a lot of important reasons that this information is meaningful and impactful in their lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for your service, first of all. And also on the topic of political persuasion or brainwashing, as we were saying, right? Is there a way to get somebody to recognize that they're going in a contradictory loop in their own logic and belief systems? And if so, what is that?
This is a really great question. He's asking how to try to help people that have entrenched themselves into a way of thinking. And this can be really challenging because this is kind of a psychological grouping a psychological grooming that happens over many years, right? It is not a slow, it is not a fast one-on-one engagement. They've been receiving messaging for a very, very long time about what that means to them, and some people have even internalized that into their own identity. And so if you're challenging that, it's like challenging who they are as a person, right? And that can be hard. So what I've tried to do in my own challenges with those relationships, I've had a friend that was, convinced of the pandemic, is to try and meet them with empathy and respect, regardless of their position, and see that everyone is susceptible to manipulation. No one is perfect at assessing what the exact truth is because we only have the information available to us. We're only seeing the information catered into our own threads and feeds. And so what I'll mostly say about that is that it's incredibly challenging to try to reverse that conditioning because it took place over a number of years. But to start with empathy, love, and compassion.
So would you say that empathy, love, and compassion would be the frame to which you would hope that they would mimic or mirror?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So you said use empathy, compassion, and respect. And so my question is, do you think that the individual would then mirror that? Or
Not necessarily.
okay.
Because that there's a function of trust. We think of love as like a romantic endeavor, but love can be respect, right? You don't necessarily think of your relationship with your boss as romantic, but you should love them enough to at least have respect that they're going to try and collaborate with you in a meaningful way. If you don't feel that level of love for your boss, you owe it to yourself to move on, right? It is not necessarily going to be reciprocated, and you can't win everyone. In psychological operations, there is a targeting audience that is not necessarily ideal for messaging because they've already gone too far into their ideological beliefs.
Okay. Thank you.
So you mentioned that there is no difference between good social engineering and real love. Like it seems almost the same, except one is good because it's not trying to do harm. So if you have like a really good friend circle, family, like in that sense, everyone is trying to social engineer you all the time. So what makes something like a good family versus like what is something like, okay, this is bad?
So if I understand your question correctly, it's that I'm sorry, can you try to rephrase the question?
Yeah. Good social engineering, if it is done, like it is not very different from love. So what makes something good versus bad? Like,
Oh, okay. What makes something good versus bad? All right, in social engineering, this is there's two bistrates on this, right? Intent is classically associated in ethics. If your intent is good, then even if you make a mistake, then it's considered good. But in law, it's the opposite. There's no consideration for intent. It's just damage and association. You did damage. There was an association. You are guilty, right? And so the way that we function with each other is a combination of those two things: your intent and the damage done by your actions. So even if your intent is good, you should still try to consider the potential damage that you're doing.
thank you.
Hi. Actually piggybacking off of that question. So you mentioned that if your intention is good, then it's more okay in a sense. How do you set that check within yourself to make sure that you are not overimposing yourself and your own thoughts onto your loved ones?
How do you ensure that you're not overimposing your thoughts or your will on your loved ones?
Yeah.
This is where I feel